Hey, hi, hello, and welcome Repair Nation. I'm your host, Caitlin, aka iPhone Repair Girl, and I'm gonna forewarn you, I do have a sinus cold, so if I sound a little nasally or funny, please be nice in the comments. I know my voice probably doesn't sound the greatest at the moment, but just bear with me. Today, I'm going to be showing you how to fix the glass screen, otherwise known by its more technical name, the digitizer, on an iPad 6th generation. Now, this is going to be a very detailed video, which means this is also going to be a very lengthy video. If you're about to perform this repair yourself, then I first off want to wish you good luck, and I'd love it if those of you who do use this video for live instruction, please leave me a comment letting me know how I did or any questions that you may have related to this repair. If you enjoy this video, you should definitely subscribe and share this with your friends and family, as I'm going to be trying to be more consistent in posting repairs every other Friday from now on going forward. And now with all that being said, let's jump straight into the repair. So the tools that I'm using today are from iFixit.com. I personally have their ProTech toolkit, but you can also buy any of these tools individually from their website. I just do want to mention that this isn't a sponsored post. It's not an ad. I genuinely do use their tools for all of my repairs, and I have ever since they were recommended to me by a fellow technician back when I first started in 2015. So I've used them for years, and I know they're reliable, which is why they're my go-to tools, and I wouldn't use anything else. I'd also like to point out really quick here that I am not using any form of heat. So if this is your first time doing an iPad repair, or if it's your 5th time doing an iPad repair, maybe you're just not that comfortable with them yet, which is okay. I would recommend using some form of heat. If you don't have necessarily a heat gun to use, which would be more of the proper tool, you can definitely get away with using something like a hair dryer even. You would just want to be careful with not holding it in the same place over the black part of the screen, the display. You don't want to hold it for too long in the same place, because you can definitely actually burn a spot into the display and damage it. So you want to be careful when using heat. Like I said, have been doing this for a few years, which is why I don't personally like to use heat anymore with iPads. I just find that I can still use my tools without heat, and I usually don't have a problem. So that's why I'm not going to be using heat in this video. But once again, if that's something that would be more comfortable for you, then definitely go ahead, bust out your heat gun, bust out your hair dryer, and just go along the corners, and it will help to loosen up that adhesive so that it's easier to pull the glass off. And the tool that I'm using here, and that I'm going to be using all the way around the iPad to break the glass off, is called a jimmy. It is a curved, kind of like an angled blade with a nice strong handle that is from iFixit, and that again is just my go-to tool whenever I do an iPad. It's also my go-to tool when I actually open up a phone screen, like an iPhone, Android. It's just a really thin blade, and it's good for prying something up and prying something open, even if there is adhesive there. So that's why I use my jimmy, and I just use it along the frame of the iPad. All I'm really doing is going along the outer frame and breaking off that glass and getting that adhesive lifted out of the way. Later on in the video, I will be actually cleaning the adhesive, and you have to clean the adhesive so that it's off entirely, and that just allows the new glass screen to sit properly so that it looks the same as it did when it was brand new. If you don't clean that adhesive up and you don't clean it really well, then there will be a little bit of interference with the glass and the frame, so you might see like a little gap along the frame of the iPad in certain spots, and it will obviously look repaired. So the goal here is to try and make it look as close to new as when it originally came out of the box, and that's what we're gonna be doing. So for this next part, it gets a little repetitive. You can see I'm just breaking the glass off, and a lot of my work was already actually done for me because my customer's toddler took a big chunk out of the middle of the glass, as you can see there. So all that I have to do is take the rest of the screen off, and for this next part I'm just going to speed this up, and I'll come back in once I have the screen off. I actually wanted to come back a little early because I'm getting to the part here where we're getting close to the home button. And since this is a 6th generation iPad, it does have Touch ID, meaning the fingerprint unlocking. So whenever you're dealing with an iPad that does have fingerprint capability, you want to be very careful around this part here when you're getting close to the home button. You want to try and not stick your blade too far in towards the screen, and you kind of just want to make like short, jagged breaks so that you can just peel the glass little by little and chip it away. That way you can expose the area around the home button more, and you'll be able to see where to avoid exactly, because there is a cable leading from the home button coming along the right side of the bottom part of the LCD, and it connects in under the display there. So along that right side, especially where I'm about to come up to, you want to be very careful, and it's okay to be as slow as possible around this part. So now that the screen is about to be coming off, the next step is to get the LCD out. Now the LCD is held down by 4 screws, but this screen is still attached to the motherboard by some cables that go underneath the LCD. So what you see me doing here is using my toolkit to kind of lay under the screen and prop up that glass. The reason I'm doing that is because, as you remember from the home button, there's a cable. Because of it being a Touch ID cable, it's even more important, again, that goes from the home button to the motherboard underneath that display. And you especially don't want to bend or rip that cable, so you don't want to just let that screen fall flat. That's why I prefer to prop it up a little bit while I unscrew all of the screws around the LCD. So now that you've seen me take the 4 screws out from the display, again, I like to just turn the iPad because it makes it a little bit easier to work with. And the iPad 6 generations here have this material, it's almost like a little epoxy. It's shiny and it's black, and you have to break this up. It's around the screw holders on all 4 screws for the LCD. So basically what you see me doing here is I'm taking my angled tweezers, again from my kit that I got from ifixit.com, and I'm just using my tweezers because they're thin and metal and they give me a good angle to just break up and take out this little black epoxy that's there. You need to get as much of that broken up as possible. I've even sometimes in the past actually used some debonder or adhesive remover on the tip of my tweezers before I first set it in there, just to help me loosen that adhesive epoxy, we're gonna call it, whatever it is, up more. And then once it's broken up enough, you need to lift that white screw holder up off of that, because that's going to be how you'll get the LCD out. We're going to lift the LCD from the top of the iPad because it is connected to the motherboard at the bottom of the iPad. So once you have this top right corner broken up enough to where it can just lift a little bit, then you'll move on to the top left corner. I personally like starting at the top right corner because I feel like that is where you have enough room to really start at your best spot, if that makes sense. On the top left side, you have the headphone jack that's kind of taking up a little more room than the back camera does. So you just have a little bit better access if you start at that top right corner with the back camera, personally, is what I believe. And then now I just move on over to that top left side where the headphone jack is, and you see me just repeating the exact same thing. And then eventually, once that's broken up enough, you can see I lift the LCD up. And then you have to be careful here. What you see me doing is unscrewing the battery. Always, always, when you're working on electronics, you guys should know you want to first and foremost disconnect the battery. Make sure the device is turned off before you even start, and then disconnect that battery as soon as you get in there first before disconnecting anything else. That just releases any potential energy that might still be sitting in the iPad. And if you don't do that and you start disconnecting other parts of the iPad first, then you can actually damage the board. And that, believe it or not, is how most iPads get things like backlight damage and all kinds of different things when there's a board issue. So always just make sure you unscrew that battery first, and you stick a little pick in there just to separate it so that it's not still connected. Now, what you see me doing here is moving on. Since I have disconnected the battery, I am unscrewing the bracket that is covering the connectors for the digitizer glass, the LCD display, and your home button cable. So once I have this LCD plate off, you're going to see me start disconnecting the cables from the motherboard. And you want to avoid doing this with like your fingers, just because your fingers can have, oils in them, and you don't want to really just be touching things with your bare hands. So there is a tool that I use that's called a spudger. It's made of nylon, which is ESD safe, meaning that you're not going to give the board any damage from using this tool. My tool, again, iFixit.com. I know I just like keep plugging them. I swear I'm not like sponsored by them or anything, but that's the tool I'm using. That's where I got it from. And it's just the safest way to disconnect those connectors without damaging them. The connectors themselves are made up of about a dozen or so really, really microscopically small pins. And, using something like your finger or something a little bigger can definitely damage even just one of those pins, and even just one little thing being damaged can make the whole connector stop working on the board. So you want to avoid board damage as much as possible by being careful and using the right tools to begin with. So what you see me doing here is lifting and disconnecting the home button cable last. And the home button cable, you would just flip the top part of the connector up towards the bottom, and then you can just slide the ribbon down, and then you can therefore take off the glass screen, and now you can just move on to working on getting the home button actually out of the glass screen. So since this is, again, an iPad 6 generation, you have to be very careful around this cable because it is a Touch ID cable. If you damage this cable and you have to replace it, the home button itself will still be able to work, but the fingerprint scanner would never work again if you did damage that cable and have to replace it. And that is just a privacy feature of Apple's, I believe it just stems from they wouldn't want someone to be able to take another iPad of the same model, put their fingerprint on that home button, and then open it up and switch out the home button with the one that's on your model, and then be able to unlock it by that fingerprint. So the fingerprints are always only able to work on the original home button. So once that home button ever has to be replaced, that fingerprint is just done so. Again, the functionality of the press, it'll still work, just not that fingerprint. So it does technically devalue the iPad, which is why you want to be careful to avoid mistakes around this part. What I'm doing here is using my jimmy. Again, I know a lot of people will use heat around this part because there is some kind of epoxy around the bracket that holds down the home button. So if you do feel more comfortable using heat, then by all means go for it. I personally don't feel the need to use heat because I've been doing this for a few years, so I'm a little more comfortable. But if heat is what's going to loosen that adhesive to where you feel the most comfortable taking that off, knowing that you're not just gonna, break or slice anything, then go ahead and do that. You see me slowly just peeling up this home button cable. It is just lightly adhesed to the glass. So once I get to this part here, again, I'm just using my blade, my jimmy, to slide in between the glass and that actual piece so that I can lift it and then keep lifting the actual ribbon out from the glass screen. So once you've done enough of this, eventually the home button will come out. So just make sure you set it aside somewhere safe. And all that you really have to do when you take out the button itself is use your blade to separate it. It is adhesed down the actual circle, so you're just going to ever so slightly slide your blade in there and lift the home button real carefully. And then it comes out pretty easily. Definitely inspect the cable and try and see if you did make any mistakes and rip it or possibly tear it, so that you can kind of make a good guesstimation of if you think you are going to need to replace that or not, possibly. And then once you have this home button out, you're gonna see there's actually around the home button itself a circle. It's white on this one because it's a white home button. On black home buttons, they're black. But sometimes the replacement screens have these circles already installed on the new screen, and sometimes they don't. So depending on if it is on the new screen or not, when you go to lay this into the new screen, if the new screen already has that there, you're going to have some resistance. It's going to feel like the home button doesn't sit in the new screen right because there's that gap, and you would actually have to take that little circle off of the new screen or off of the home button in order for it to sit properly in there. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, if there's not, that circle on the new screen, then you're good to go. You can just set it into the new screen like normal. What you see me now doing here is I'm using debonder, otherwise known as liquid adhesive remover. The stuff that I use is debonder itself, but I've heard of people using like 91 proof alcohol to do this as well. And all that I'm doing is I am pouring a little bit of it onto a cotton pad. I don't really want to saturate the cotton pad so that when I'm doing this, it's going to leak all over. But you just want to put a tiny, little dime-sized dab on there. And then what I'm doing is wiping around the metal frame of the iPad, is just removing that old adhesive that was holding down the original screen. So like I mentioned earlier, you're going to need to do this, and you want to do this as thoroughly and as well as possible, because if you don't remove that adhesive that was there originally, when you go to lay the new screen down, you're gonna see like a gap between the glass and the frame. It's not gonna sit down properly. And you want that gone because there's adhesive on the new screen, so the adhesive on the new screen isn't gonna stick as well if it's on top of, old adhesive. So as long as you've cleaned up the frame really well and removed all this old adhesive, you can literally see it wiping away with the liquid adhesive remover that I'm using. As long as you do that well enough, then the screen should sit flushed with the iPad frame, and that'll make it look just like it did when it was brand new out of the box again. So just remember, do this around all four corners, all four sides of the frame of the iPad. For little small spots like this part where I'm going above the front camera on the frame and you see the frame gets really thin right there, that's where it's best to use something like a cotton swab instead of actually a cotton pad. So now this next part, I've already explained what I'm doing, so it's going to get a bit repetitive. All I'm doing is going around the frame, so I'm going to speed this next part up a little bit, and then I'll touch back with you in a minute. Okay, so now I'm back, and what you didn't just see me do is off camera, I applied two very small strips of adhesive to the bracket that sits against the home button. Um, you want to make sure that you remove the small strips of adhesive that are already on that bracket and just replace them with really, really thin adhesive. I personally like using what's called Tessa tape because I think that's the thinnest and has the best hold. If you use thicker adhesive, like some of that red strip adhesive, it can actually be too thick, and over time, it can cause the home button to actually like cave into the iPad because the bracket isn't supporting it firmly enough because the adhesive there isn't firm enough to hold it. So if you've ever seen like an iPad home button kind of fall in like that, usually it's a repaired iPad that someone didn't use the best tape there to hold that bracket in. So you just want to make sure you do that, and you want to make sure that you press the bracket down firmly so that it's holding, and actually click the home buttons. You should be able to feel it click, just like you would if it was already installed onto the iPad. So now that we've done that, we're getting to the last parts. So what I'm doing here, now that I have the home button transferred onto the new glass, is I am connecting the cables for that glass digitizer and for the home button into the iPad again. So you just see me using my fingers here, and you want to be very careful. I like to say to never press firmly, just because you should be able to feel it line up. You should be able to kind of feel it, and you should be able to just really simply, like, light-handedly press it in with feeling a click. If you feel like it's not going in, or if you feel like you're putting too much pressure, stop what you're doing, because like I said earlier, there are about a dozen pins on each of those connectors, and if you're pressing in the wrong spot, it's really easy to bend one of those out of place, break one of those off, and then you have board damage and you've caused yourself a bigger issue. So be light-handed and just feel it out. If it takes you a couple of times of laying it on and adjusting it before you actually push it in, that's fine. That's normal. We all still do that. And then for the home button, you are going to do the same thing as you did to disconnect it. You just make sure that top part of the connector is lifted up towards the bottom of the iPad, and you slowly just slide that cable on in, and then you close that connector. And there's a white line on the home button that I didn't show in this video, but that white line should be as close to the connector as possible. That's how you know you've slid it in good enough. And if you do end up closing the iPad and you realize that the home button's not working, but you thought that the cable looked perfectly fine, then you just want to make sure you go back in and just make sure that white line is close enough to the connector, because if it's not, then it won't work, because it's not really connected all the way. So now I'm laying in the LCD, which is the last step. You can't see, but I have the digitizer glass propped up again, because like I was saying earlier, you don't want to just have that laying flat, because you can damage the cables, especially when it's the new glass. So I have my toolkit just behind it to help prop it up, and I'm connecting the LCD and then using those screws from earlier to re-screw down that LCD plate so that the digitizer, the home button, and that LCD are all going to be firmly connected in, and it shouldn't matter if the person drops it or whatnot. None of those cables are going to be like knocked loose or messed with. Once you have finished doing this with the bracket that goes over those cables, the last thing to do is re-screw in the battery connector. And you can see here, I've already taken the pick out just right before I did this, because I needed to lay in the LCD to make sure the LCD was going to line up correctly. But you just want to, last step is to re-screw in that screw that goes for the battery. If you don't do that, the battery might not have a good connection, and then it might not turn on. So you want to remember to do that. And then once you've done that and you've laid the LCD down, you're going to take all 4 of those screws that you took out before to remove the LCD and put them back in. You always want to make sure that when you're taking the screws out that you keep track of the exact placement of where they were on the iPad, because occasionally one will be a little longer, one will be a little shorter, and you never want to screw something in that's a longer screw into a shorter spot, because you could damage the board, you could damage different things on the iPad. It's the exact same thing as fixing like an iPhone or any type of electronic. Just you don't want to mix up the order of your screws, so make sure that you are screwing those back in the exact same places you took them out originally. And then one of the last things really to do here is you want to clean the display as best as possible. I mean, you can do this when you first take it out, but always at the very end, just go back over it. Use a microfiber cloth and make sure that any fingerprints from your fingers, any little microscopic, pieces of dust or lint or hairs that might have fallen from the air that are on there are out of there and off of there. Because if you don't do that and you close the iPad, you will on certain lighting colored screens, you will see, a little speck here, a little hair, or a piece of lint here. So, treat it as if it's your own iPad, even if it is for a customer, or if it is your own iPad, then, treat it with love and make sure that you clean that off so that you don't have any annoying blemishes on the screen when you're using it after. And the last thing you see me doing here is I take my angled tweezers, and be very, very careful. You don't have to use, metal. You can use just a little skinny spudger or something if you want. But I'm just using my angled tweezers because they're thin. And what I did is I pulled the digitizer and home button cable a little bit in towards the LCD. You don't want to pull hard. Remember, that cable is so sensitive. It controls the touch and the home button. But pull it in ever so slightly towards the LCD, just so that when you close it, it doesn't close on that cable. Because with a lot of iPads, that will happen, and that can cause issues with the touch or the home button immediately or later on. So now that I've closed it, off camera, of course, you want to go around the corners of the frame and make sure you really press that adhesive all in and you've sealed it all in. And then the last thing to do is test the iPad out. The screen that you just replaced controls the touch. So you're going to want to make sure that the touch is okay. Front camera, hi, that's me. Keyboard, everything works good. And if it does, then you have just completed your iPad 6th Gen glass screen repair. And I want to congratulate you guys if you just finished the repair. I hope it looks great and everything worked good and you got some good tips from me. If you would like to see more repair videos on my channel, be sure to subscribe, and I'm going to be trying to put out new repairs every other Friday from now on going forward. So yeah, I hope to see you guys here again in the future, and thank you for watching my video. Thank you for sticking around, and yeah, peace out, Repair Nation. This is iPhone Repair Girl, and I am officially signing out. Goodbye.